Soka Ito was restless. The unwashed were moving quickly around her. Things were being done now, and done quickly. Something was about to happen, but she couldn't get any of the grown-ups to slow down long enough to tell her anything. She knew that Emily and Clive were in trouble. That's why she'd been sleeping at different houses almost every night. She knew something was coming quickly, and she understood it was happening now. She wanted to know what it was and, more importantly, what she could do to help. They'd been gathered into a large warehouse, at least 50 by her count. They were preparing things in small boxes, but she couldn't tell what they were. Her poor English skills made it hard to ask questions, but when no one would even look at her, she was really in for confusion. Her dreams had been bad recently. In them she saw the red star of Tobit, but so did everyone else. Not just the people in Delphia, but people everywhere. The star was making them do bad things. In her dreams she saw murders and rapes. She saw innocent people losing their minds to the will of Hyraaq Tobit. She knew that these dreams meant something very important, but couldn't figure out what. Now all of her friends were running around, grabbing supplies, talking quickly to one another, and she had no idea why. She felt that she would lose her mind if someone didn't talk to her soon. And then, without warning, all the noise stopped. The leader, Brandon Leary himself, had arrived. All of the busy people stopped what they were doing and lined up in rows to listen to him speak. She listened too, doing her best to understand the words that she could. People of the unwashed, our time has come, Brandon announced. There were cheers from the crowd. He raised his hand and they got quiet again and listened. It would seem that our time to strike has come now. We all know what parts we have to play. We all know the risks ahead of us. We've seen for ourselves just how dangerous these enemies of ours are. They will not show us mercy, nor give us quarter should we surrender. I will not order any of you to die fighting, but I will remind you that should we surrender, an even worse death will await. I have already initiated the first step of our plan. Those of you on the strategic teams, you know where your points are. Once I dismiss you all, you will go to your points and carry out your tasks. To those on the assault team, I will lead you personally. We shall converge on the cathedral and take it. Our path to freedom lies there, and if the plan works as I predict it shall. All we will have to do is hold that building until what needs to be done is done. Afterwards, we shall make our way to the Mendez Gate. I cannot promise you that any of us will actually be able to leave Delphia. I do not know what Tobit's magic has done. For those of us who have been here longer than any normal lifespan should permit, I cannot promise you what will happen once we are outside of Tobit's magic either. I may age to dust in a matter of seconds, or I may resume aging as though I never missed a day. These are all the mysteries that await us. However, my friends, I know that I cannot sit here a day longer, and I doubt that a lot of you wish to either. If we are to die, let it be on our own terms, fighting. For I would rather die free than live a slave to Tobit a day longer. If any of you do not agree, if any of you have doubts or fears, you are welcome to leave. I will not force any one of you to fight tonight. For those of you that choose to stay, though, that choose to fight by my side, know that I love each and all of you. We have fought together here for countless years, all in hopes of seeing this day come. Let us fight together one more time as brothers, sisters, and friends. If there's a life outside of these walls for us, let us battle hand in hand to win it. Godspeed to all of you. I shall see you on the battlefield. Roars of applause followed his speech, and Soka watched as men and women grabbed the boxes they'd been preparing and made their way out of the warehouse and into the night. Soka saw that many of them were carrying guns, and she knew without a doubt that tonight would either be her last in Delphia or her last night alive. As for the rest of you, gather into ranks and prepare to march on the cathedral on my command. If they were moving against the cathedral, Soka knew that tonight was the night. She'd been told what to do, and over the last couple weeks she had been successful in making contact with the right people. Now it was her job, a very important job at that, to let them know it was time to head towards Delphia. Soka Ito closed her eyes and began to search. She fell into a meditative state, faces flying by, people she could perhaps reach if needed. However, she was looking for two very specific faces, and she prayed that they would be able to receive her message. Lena arrived upon summon to Tabitha's chambers. She had a feeling she knew the nature of this summons and was prepared for the worst. As she went to knock, the door opened for her. She saw her leader, dressed for combat, leaning against the wall of her room and twirling a dagger. Lena prepared for her boss to throw that dagger right at her heart, but that didn't happen. Instead, she beckoned Lena to enter. "Lena, we haven't had much time to really talk since you came back from New Orleans. I wanted to congratulate you on the successful capture of Derek and Claire. Bringing back the whiny little brother was not necessary, but a nice touch. I always appreciate it when my girls go above and beyond." "Of course, Tabitha," Lena answered cautiously. "About Lacey, you told me that she'd been killed by a police officer, right?" "I did tell you that, yes." "Why?" "Because, Tabitha, that is what happened." "Doesn't that seem a bit unlikely, Lacey being taken so easily?" "Tabitha, she was a little overly risky on the last mission. I had to keep reminding her of that. I think she was trying too hard to impress you." Lena chose this excuse carefully. She wanted to somehow avoid painting Lacey in a negative light, while still explaining how a common officer of the law could take the girl down. "I see. I wish all of my girls were so eager for my favor." "Why do you say that, Tabitha?" "I forced you to be a sister, didn't I, Lena? I dragged you into this under the threat of death. Do you begrudge me for it?" Lena knew that Tabitha had grown suspicious. There was no denying this game. She already suspected her of lying, and another lie would no doubt seal her fate. She took a risk with her next answer. "At first I did, yes. The night you saved me from Ortiz, you told me that I could go with you or die. It was hard for me at first, I will admit that, but I've had plenty of chances to try and escape, yet I've come back to you each and every time, carrying out your missions. There is no other life for me now, Tabitha. What would I do anyway? Return to Colombia and try to explain to my family, to Interpol, to everyone that ever knew me, how I've hardly aged in over 20 years? No, Tabitha, that is no option for me. The life I knew is over. You are my life now, you and the sisters. I swear it." "So you wouldn't mind proving it then, now would you?" "Anything. Let me show you my loyalty." "Very well. I intend to have a little private ceremony tonight. We haven't had much use for the cathedral since Madison has been dead. Gregory certainly doesn't know how to conduct a proper sacrifice, and with Mr. Pinky away, well, I guess that makes me in charge, doesn't it?" "Yes, I suppose it does." "Good. Go on down to the dungeon and gather me up Claire and Derek. I think it's time that Tobit is appeased once more, and I can think of no two better candidates for the task." "But Tabitha, won't Pinkerton be furious should he return and they're dead?" "I just watched the news today, Lena, and you know what I saw? Seems that old Mr. Pinky convinced the council to reveal the Red Star to the world. That tells me that Pinkerton has been playing his own game all along. Seems as though he's turned his sights to bigger things than Delphia. I'm not sure what his end game is, but I am certain that when he does return, he will be happy to know that the rebels are squashed and his little troublemakers from the outside world are dead. If he isn't, I'll deal with the results. After we finish in the cathedral, I'm going to go and track down that little girl Soka as well. She's had more than enough time to play, and now it's time for the game to conclude. So go down to the dungeon and bring Claire and Derek back to the cathedral. I'm going to head there first and prepare for the ritual." "As you wish, Tabitha." Lena walked away quickly, heading down long rows of winding steps that would take her to the pit of the tower where the prisoners were held. Tabitha summoned one of the uniformed guards that patrolled the halls. "Gather several of your comrades and follow Lena to the dungeon. She is to remove the prisoners and bring them to the cathedral. If she does anything besides that, kill her." "Yes, ma'am," the guard replied, and marched off quickly to carry out his orders. Tabitha closed her doors and began to make her way out of the tower. As she passed the Grand Magus's chambers, she suddenly had other ideas. She was in the mood to cause pain, and she felt that the whiny little prick Trevor was in need of some real advice. She figured she could spare a bit of time with him before making her way to the church. She didn't really need to prepare much anyway. She really just intended to kill them to avenge Lacey. She figured that she had enough time for a quick stop. As she turned to open the Grand Magus's doors, She caught sight of her reflection in a mirror hanging in an alcove. "Don't dawdle, girlie. You know what you need to do," the goat-masked woman informed her. "Why don't you just shut up already?" Tabitha replied to her reflection and gripped the door handles. Trevor's Gamble. Trevor heard the approaching footsteps and at first thought that it was Gregory coming to see him. As distant as he felt from his brother these days, he still welcomed the visits eagerly. Never in his life had he felt so alone anywhere like he did in Delphia, so the act of simply having his brother around did wonders for him. No matter what Gregory had allowed this place to turn him into, he was still Trevor's brother. They'd only had each other for the majority of their lives, and that couldn't be changed by anything. Then he heard the female voice of Tabitha Shaw. It sounded as though she was talking to herself, asking herself questions and answering them. Trevor patted his waistline once, nodded, and prepared for what would come next. Tabitha entered without being invited and took a long and fierce look at Trevor Leary. "How did you and Gregory come out of the same damn womb? That's what I want to know," Tabitha asked him. "Well, not all of us was spawned from hell, Tabitha," Trevor replied, actually surprising her a bit with his nerve. "Watch yourself, boy. You're only alive as a favor to your brother, who I'm a little bit fond of. Test me too much, though, and there are a million ways I can make you hurt. Do you believe me, Trevor?" "In fact, I do. I have no doubt that you would not think twice about putting a knife in my back." "Good. I like that we all know where we stand here. If you do survive this, you will be expected to get on board with the way things are done here. I'm sure Gregory has tried to explain that to you a few times, and from what he's told me, you are proving to be just so stubborn. So allow me to help you. This isn't home, this isn't jail, and this isn't a kidnapping. You have no rights, there are no police that are going to come and look for you here, you have no lawyer, and you don't get a phone call. What you may get to do is live, and that depends on how much longer we keep your brother around, and how much longer we can tolerate you. And let me tell you something, Trevor. If you keep acting like this, that won't be very long at all." Trevor chose to remain silent through all of this. He could tell Tabitha was on edge, and she wouldn't need much help to push her over it. Trevor was determined to just let her say her piece and be done with it. That was until Tabitha made that choice impossible. "I just wanted to come by and let you know a couple of things to sort of help you fit in here. For one, Gregory isn't getting to leave. I know he thinks he is. He has this whole plan in his head to go back to London, manage his business from there. He talks in his sleep, you know, and I'm a pretty good listener. He might have these ideas of drilling for oil here, making lots of money off of Delphia, coming and going as he pleases, but guess what, Trevor? None of that is going to happen. Gregory might be given a real title one day. That champion of Tobit is just something that Mr. Pinky made up on the spot. He really does like your brother. As do I. I like him a lot, in fact. But not enough to grant him too much special favor. Sure, he can have the big bed in the private room. He can have you, so long as you don't become a nuisance, and hell, he can even have me, so long as he remains so passionate. But guess what, Trevor? That's all it'll be. He is as much a full-time resident of Delphia as you and the rest of these poor bastards are out here. Delphia doesn't change, it just changes people. We'll get a new Grand Magus and the old rituals will pick right back up. The maskings and the feastings and all that other good stuff. After all, it's not a ritual if you keep changing it. Me and Pinky knew right away that your brother was a real shaker and mover, and we decided to let him keep believing that he was going to come here and just shake stuff right on up. If that makes him happy, all the better." Tabitha took particular pleasure in watching Trevor's face change with each and every new fact she dropped on him. Perhaps he really had believed that Gregory had some real power around here. Perhaps he thought that any day now, they would just head right back to London together and resume their lives. She was enjoying this so much that she was almost drooling with the anticipation of the next piece of reality she was going to give him. Smiling, she continued, "As for your friends, Claire and Derek, tonight will be their last on Earth, I'm afraid." Trevor's eyes went wide and his face was swallowed with horror. This fueled Tabitha even further. "They're going to be sacrificed, by me, tonight. They're already being taken to the cathedral. I just wanted to stop by and tell you. Maybe you'd like to come along? I'll even give you a front row seat. How's that sound?" Trevor had never been known for his courage. Gregory was always the brave one. Trevor had never been known for speaking out. Gregory had always been the bold one. Trevor had never been known for taking actions. Gregory had always been the adventurous one. However, if someone were to line both of the Leary brothers up, arm in arm, and ask them who was the noble one, the honorable one, the one that could come through for anyone in a pinch, they would have pointed to Trevor each and every time. Trevor was kind, Trevor was selfless, and Trevor was loyal, perhaps to a fault. Upon hearing that Claire and Derek would be killed by the very woman standing before him, Trevor took action in ways that he was not familiar. Even as his own hands and arms moved towards the waist of his pants, his own mind screamed, "What are you doing?" He had always been cautious, and should he hesitate for even a second and allow himself to question what he knew had to be done, he was fully aware that he would lose all chance. He ordered the rational and cautious part of his brain to be silent as he followed through with the only course of action that he deemed could be useful. "I love you, brother. May you find yourself once more," Trevor whispered as he pulled from his waistband the pistol that Gregory had used to shoot Madison. The powers that be had allowed him to keep it, and from the moment Trevor found it during the many hours he was left alone in the Magus' chambers, he'd hoped he would never have to use it. He checked the magazine and found that there were 3 bullets still left. 3 chances, should he be forced to actually fire it. And now, as Tabitha Shaw came to inform him that she would now murder 2 of his friends, he knew that the time to draw the gun had arrived. Trevor was not a trained combatant as Tabitha was. He did not have a killer instinct as Tabitha did. He did not have her enhanced speed or reflexes. He knew nothing of the craft of fighting. Still, his sudden actions took her by surprise. She was a woman that was never surprised anymore, and perhaps it was her sheer disdain for Trevor as a man that had allowed her to believe he was incapable of fighting back. Maybe it was her focus on Lacey that made her sloppy. Her rush for revenge had perhaps taken her eyes off the prize. Regardless of what or who she blamed, the end result was the same. Trevor Leary had gotten the drop on her. She had no time to react, and in that moment was almost drowned in shame. Trevor locked the gun on her chest, something his father had perhaps once told him, to aim for the chest, not the head, because the chest was easiest to hit. He was aware somewhere in the back of his mind that he was about to murder someone, but he refused to allow that part of him, the London Trevor, the nice, weak, happy, lovable, pathetic, and weak Trevor, to dictate his course of action. In that moment, there was no Trevor, just a man who wanted to survive and help his friends. Trevor pulled the trigger. Tabitha closed her eyes, awaiting the report and the pain that would follow. However, there was no report and there was no pain. She immediately opened her eyes and saw the problem. Trevor hadn't pulled the slide back on the pistol. There was no bullet in the chamber. Trevor had only a split second to realize something was wrong. He didn't know if the safety was on or if the bullets were just duds. His mind told him to look at the safety or something, but by then it was all too late. His chance had come and gone. He saw Tabitha reach towards her belt, her hands moving quickly, so fast they were almost a blur. He wanted to say something to her, beg, plead, anything. However, the look on her face told him that there was no amount of begging in the universe that would stop her now. He decided instead that he would die with dignity. He thought of his brother, the times they'd spent together. He thought of Claire, a woman he developed a small crush on. He remembered them in the French Quarter, going about laughing as though life was normal, and they were just tourists on a vacation. He thought of his mother and father. He remembered the night Gregory told him all about the cult of Tobit, and what it meant to bear the Leary name. He saw Tabitha bring out a dagger and raise it to the level of his head. He could almost hear it as the blade cut through the air. He knew it wouldn't miss. In his final moments, Trevor thought of Gregory. He forgave his brother, who'd only been doing what he'd done their entire lives, trying to protect his family. As the blade buried itself into Trevor's skull, his final thoughts had been of forgiveness and love. In the next second, the blade pierced into Trevor's brain, ending all thoughts forever. Old friends in bad places. Derek and Claire had been prisoners now for 2 weeks. They were kept in the dungeon, which also housed Emily Pert and Clive Andrews, as well as Timothy Van Buren. Together, they had formed their own little think tank over the last 14 days or so. Derek had initially been thrilled that Timothy was still unharmed. However, hearing the rest of the situation brought his thrill down to dread. Apparently, Gregory Leary had joined the side of Tobit, being appointed to the rank of champion, for whatever that was worth. His first official act, besides killing Madison, had apparently been to turn Emily and Clive over to the Delphian authorities. They'd been promptly locked away, and had learned that they were being held until the return of someone known as Pinkerton. When Derek asked who that was, Timothy was happy to inform him. "He's the avatar of Tobit, a man who has gained so much favor from him that he's allowed to carry out the will of Tobit directly. His words are considered to be the very words of Hyraaq Tobit, and he is not questioned here." "Worse than Madison then, huh?" Derek had asked. Emily replied, "Far worse. If Madison is a pimple, think of Pinkerton as full-blown AIDS." "Derek, just what in the hell are you doing here anyway?" Timothy had demanded, and so they told him, Derek and Claire taking turns telling bits and pieces of their story. In the end, Timothy looked at Derek with a sense of sadness and disappointment. "I wish you hadn't come back here, son. I really do. I didn't rescue you from this place just to see you come back. Still, thank you for remembering me. I am sorry to see that it was perhaps for nothing." "It won't be," Clive spoke. "Lena is still out there, right? She still knows what to do, doesn't she?" "I hate to break it to you, Clive, but it was Lena that double-crossed us. As soon as we got here, she tied us up and brought us to the dungeon. Seems as though she decided that her loyalties lied somewhere else," Derek explained. "Then we are doomed," Timothy stated sadly. "Wait, just wait," Clara told them. "Maybe this is bleak, but we're not dead yet. I doubt everyone else, the rest of your unwashed group, has just given up, right?" "Claire is right," Derek joined in. "There could still be a chance. I've survived this once before, and the odds looked bad back then. Worse, even. I'm not saying this is the best case scenario, but we are still alive. Wouldn't your leader try and rescue us?" "I don't know," Clive answered. "If he sees a chance to rescue us and bring down Delphia, then yes, but if he gets his chance to bring the city down, I'll think he'll take it no matter what." "Then we wait and see. We can't do anything else anyway," Claire stated, and that is what they did. During that time they spoke and got to know each other a bit. Claire told them all about the Triassic Journal, how she'd been slowly pulled into the world of Tobit. She told them how Soka had helped her in her dreams, and even when awake, when she delivered her magic word to Claire when they were prisoners in Derek's apartment. She wanted to meet Soka in the real world quite badly, thanked the little girl for all of her help. During their 2 weeks, they shared more stories, becoming closer friends. Timothy eventually brought the bad news out to Derek. Sergio had been captured on the very night of Derek's escape. He'd been quickly punished for opening the doors and allowing him to escape Delphia. The mob had dragged him back to Madison, who did not see the same use in him that he did in Timothy. Sergio had been killed the following night at a large ritual. The intent was to remind everyone that no one tampered with the will of Tobit. Derek did not speak at first. He'd been afraid that Sergio did not make it, but somehow he'd always hoped his friend was still alive. Hearing the news that he'd not made it left Derek feeling as though he'd been punched in the stomach, and all his air was forced from his lungs. "He died bravely," Clive suddenly spoke. "I was there when they did it, in the cathedral. He didn't cry and beg, didn't give Madison an ounce of pleasure. Damn this place," Derek spoke softly. "He wouldn't have made it on the outside anyway, if that helps any," Timothy stated sadly. "He'd been masked, brought back to life in the service of Tobit. He would have spent years here as one of Madison's faithful, and that is a fate worse than death, Derek." Derek didn't reply, though. He sat down in the corner of his cell and allowed tears to flow. There was nothing more to really say on the matter after all, just more death and a sea of dying. As their 2 weeks in the dungeon carried on, hope began to dry up for all of them. Derek and Claire began to believe more and more with each passing day, in fact been false, and now they were simply awaiting death. Food was brought to them once or twice a day by a uniformed guard. Sometimes they would demand answers. Sometimes they would ask to see someone in charge. The guards would never reply. They would simply drop off the meal and move along. So, on the present night, as Derek watched from the tiny window at the top of his cell as the stars and moon came out once more over Delphia, he heard the large metal door swing open at the top of the stairs. No one thought this visit would be any different. Just another drop-off of whatever Delphian delicacy was being brought in tonight. Only this time it wasn't a silent guard that came down to greet them, but rather a very familiar face. Lena. She rushed in quickly, her keys dangling from her belt, and went about opening the cell doors. "Lena, what the fuck is going on here?" Derek snapped. "It's time," she replied. "Time for what?" Claire asked. "A ritual, of course," she answered again. "What have you done, Lena? What is going on?" Emily demanded as Lena opened her cell. "Look, we're going to the cathedral, all of us," she answered, and suddenly was struck from behind by a blunt object. "Traitor!" shouted the guard. He'd followed his orders from Tabitha. Lena was ordered only to bring Claire and Derek, so when he saw her open Emily's cell, he took action. "Lena, watch out!" Emily cried as the guard raised his baton for another strike. Lena watched him raise the baton, and should that baton come down on her head, it would have likely killed her in one hit. Then she saw the man taken off his feet as Derek tackled him to the ground. As Derek and the guard struggled, Emily once again shouted a warning to Lena. "There are more coming, Lena. Be careful." 2 more guards, the ones the first had been ordered to bring along, came running down the steps. Claire, who was still caged, could do nothing other than watch in horror. Emily's cage was open, but she felt helpless to do anything. Derek was holding his own against the guard, but she didn't like his odds against 2 more. "I've got this," Lena shouted as she moved up to greet the 2 incoming guards. She drew a small pistol from an ankle holster and took aim. "Unauthorized tool!" the guard shouted. As his mouth was still moving, still shouting his condemnation of the gun, Lena fired once, the bullet striking the guard in the head and silencing him forever. The next one was swift, sidestepping Lena and avoiding the second shot that she fired. Using his baton, he knocked the gun from her hands and took her by the neck. He pushed her to the wall and pressed the baton against her throat, pushing upwards and actually raising her off the ground. She looked down at his face and saw no mercy, no thought, and no concern. He was a cold, heartless killer who was beyond reason or compassion. She struck out at him with both hands, aiming at pressure points, trying to force him to loosen his grip. It did no good. He was too determined, and he would not stop until they were all dead. Just as she felt that all hope was lost, she saw Derek rise up behind him, baton in hand. "I got your unauthorized tool right here," he screamed, and began beating the man with the club. He dropped Lena to the floor as he attempted to turn around and fight, but it was too late for him. Derek slammed the club into his head over and over again until he fell to the ground, blood gushing from his head, his nose, his mouth, and even his eyes. Derek continued to pound the club into the man's skull long after he was dead. Tears were coming from his eyes, and as the noise finally began to settle, she could hear what he was chanting over and over again, each time he swung the club. "Sergio, Sergio, Sergio," was what he said with each swing. Once Lena regained her feet, she went about opening the rest of the cell doors. Claire ran over to Derek and put her hand on his shoulder. He was still trying to swing the baton, though he was now too winded to do much more than lift it weakly and drop it. He had apparently killed the other guard as well, as his body lies still where they had struggled. "That's enough, Derek. You did it, okay? You saved Lena. You avenged Sergio. We have to go now," Claire said to him soothingly. Eventually, he let the baton drop out of his hands. He was still weeping. "She's right. We do have to move. We're going to the cathedral. I had to convince Tabitha to sacrifice you all to Tobit tonight," Lena stated. "Why?" Claire asked. "To make sure the idol is on the altar, for one thing. Also, to have an excuse to get us all into one place. Once the ritual starts, we're going to have some company. So the old man has finally pulled the trigger on raiding the cathedral? Clive asked. Yes. The other teams are already moving through the city, setting everything into place. Once I give the signal, Brandon will lead the assault team on the cathedral itself. Claire here is our best hope of cracking the defenses around the idol. We will all need to give her the breathing room to do that. We have to hold off the faithful, keep her safe. With Madison dead and Pinkerton gone, the worst one here is Tabitha, and if it comes to a fight, I think I can give her a hard time. Either way, the gunshot down here is going to attract attention. We need to go now. Claire and Derek started to make their way up the stairs, followed by Lena. However, Clive, Emily, and Timothy did not follow. Come on! What are you waiting for? Lena demanded. We'll stay here with Timothy. He's in no condition to walk, much less fight or run. Leave us the pistol. I'm sure you've got weapons stashed for everyone anyway, Clive informed her. You'll die if you stay here, Lena replied. You said yourself reinforcements are coming. Let us stay here and slow them down a bit. If we make it, we'll join you all in Cathedral. If not, we'll die doing our best to slow them down for you. The longer it takes them to report the escape, the longer you'll have time to work on the idol, Emily stated. Lena handed her the gun. Make it hard for them, Emily. I will. We all will. Derek had come back down the stairs upon hearing this new plan. He walked over to Timothy Van Buren, who was still sitting on the cot in his cell. So you're staying behind again. That must be your hobby or something. As Derek spoke, tears ran down his face. Derek, thank you for coming back for me. Now let me make the trip worth your time. That idol has got to go. Destroy the idol and no more Delphia. Go out there and fight. Derek gently hugged the frail man who'd once led him to freedom. It would appear that Timothy would once again lay down in the line of fire for him. Thank you. I'll never forget you, Timothy. Then survive so you can remember me. Now go. Go before this place is swarming with guards and we all die like fools together. Derek and Claire followed Lena up the stairs. Derek looked back one last time at Timothy, who once again stood, although with the support of Emily and Clive, and prepared to face the powers of Tobit again. Derek knew there would be no third time to save him. He knew this really was the final goodbye. He hated himself for leaving Timothy behind, but he was determined to obey the man's last wish, for him to survive. Once Lena and the others were gone, Clive, Emily, and Timothy gathered together at the bottom of the stairs. Clive held on to the gun now, ready to fire at the first sign of Delphian guards. A few moments later they heard the door above smash in, followed by the aggressive footfalls of guards. Clive stood and readied the pistol. Emily and Timothy armed themselves with batons from the dead guards. Well now, it would appear that we fight one last time. Very well, stiffen those upper lips, for you fall under command of an officer of the Royal Navy. Let's make these fools pay for every step they take, Timothy mustered. Clive aimed the pistol and had time to take one shot. It went wild and to the left, missing the advancing guards, and the next second they were swarmed, batons brought down upon them. The gun was knocked away from Clive, who collapsed on the floor. Timothy attempted to swing the baton, but months in the dungeon, months of malnourishment and confinement rendered him weak and frail. He was quickly disarmed. As Emily was struck across the head with the baton and felt herself drop to the ground, her last thoughts on earth were, "You better succeed, Lena. You better succeed." Gregory was still a prisoner within the small room, being held at gunpoint by forces unknown. He knew it was a member of his uncle's group. He knew that his uncle had clearly decided to allow his nephew to live. He also knew something big was going to happen, apparently tonight and apparently very soon. He had to get to Trevor. Whatever was about to go down, he wanted, in that moment only, to protect his little brother. During his time tied to the chair, he'd not been able to get the man behind him to speak. He only heard breathing that had slowly become heavier and slower. Whoever was back there was in no mood to speak or move around much. After an hour of this, he began to suspect that his captor had fallen asleep. He couldn't be sure though, so very slowly he began to test the waters. He moved his wrists about, attempting to loosen the ropes that bound him. From his captor he received no resistance. He began to twist them about more persistently, taking pleasure in the slow loosening of the ropes. He was no expert on bondage, but he got the feeling that he'd been tied down quickly. If it really was his uncle's intention to make some big move tonight, it stood to reason that he wouldn't waste a lot of time just on making sure that his untrustworthy nephew was properly tied down. Still, though, he didn't want to risk being shot in the back in the process. After an hour of slowly moving his wrists in a back and forth sort of motion, he finally felt he could slide his hands free. Now was the time for the gamble. He knew that the man behind him could just be bored, could just be watching him fully prepared to bring down the hammer, should the man in the chair actually succeed at getting his hands undone. Still, he had to try, and now he almost thought he could hear snoring coming from behind him. He didn't want to risk it, but he knew this was the only way. He had to go for it. Slowly, he pulled his arms forward from behind his back, careful to keep hold of the rope so that it wouldn't fall to the floor and wake his companion from his slumber. Now that he'd managed to free his hands, he was convinced that the man behind him must have been sleeping. Now was the hard part. His ankles were tied to the chair as well. He bent forward in the chair and very carefully went to work undoing the knots. They were, in fact, sloppy, and he found that he had little trouble working them off his ankles. Now it was time to stand up. Very slowly he rose from the chair, careful to give his legs and arms time to get some good blood circulation. He didn't want to stand up just to collapse from weak legs. Turning around very cautiously, he finally made eye contact with his captor. Just some chubby bastard with curly hair and a beard. He did have a gun, though. Gregory was overjoyed to see that this man had actually sat the gun down on a crate next to where he was sitting. Then he'd simply dozed off, likely from boredom. Very slowly, making as little noise as possible, Gregory approached. He reached forward and took hold of the pistol when the man's eyes suddenly shot open. "You!" he had to say. "Nice to meet you," Gregory replied before bringing the butt of the gun down onto the top of the man's head. "There you go, mate. Right back to sleep with you. Just like you like," Gregory whispered. He thought about tying the man up, but didn't want to spend much time in here. He had to get to Trevor quickly before whatever his uncle had planned took place. He exited the small building, tucking the gun into his jacket, and made his way towards the tower. Lena led Claire and Derek from the tower at a run. They were moving towards the cathedral, but making sure to take the shadowy streets, staying close to buildings to remain unseen. On their way across town, Lena had stopped along the side of a rather bland building. She'd searched around for a moment, before finding a loose cobblestone. "Help me lift this, Derek," she'd ordered, and Derek obeyed. Underneath the stone were several firearms. Lena took hold of what looked like a sniper rifle to Derek. She examined it, ensured it was loaded, pocketed an extra magazine, and nodded. Derek and Claire grabbed 2 pistols. "We have a nice stockpile of weapons hidden around the city. We get them from the storage warehouses. Lucky for us, Madison wanted to keep everything he took off his new residence. I just thank God he never wanted to arm the guards with anything bigger than a baton. Guess he was afraid of the inmates running the asylum." They continued to make their way slowly about the city when Lena stopped once more. Again, she searched about the ground and brought up an orange flare gun. "When I fire this, it'll let Brandon know to bring his men to the church. We have to protect Claire until she figures out how to dispel that idol." "Gee, no pressure, huh, Lena?" Claire stated. "No, Claire, none at all," she replied. "It's only our lives at stake here." Once Lena led them within sight of the cathedral, she fired the flare once into the air. "No going back now," she stated, and the 3 ran across the small town square to the side of the cathedral. "Tabitha will expect you to be brought in from the side. This way." They made their way to the side door. Lena fished through her set of keys and opened the door. "This will take us through a small rectory and then into the main cathedral. Tuck your guns into the back of your belts. Tabitha has to think that I've taken you by force. Put your hands behind your backs and hold on to your guns. It'll give the illusion that you're bound. Once we get in there, I'll hold off Tabitha. Derek, you use your gun and hold off the faithful if they show up. Claire, you know what to do, right?" "Right. Try to destroy the idol." "Okay then. Let's go."